jointly hosted science communication panel. So we are, like you just heard, we are recording the event tonight. So if you'd prefer that you aren't recorded, please just shut off your video and know that if you do turn it on and you do speak, like that will become part of the recording. So my name is Megan. I'm a 5th year PhD student, and I'm also a part of the Beyond Academia team. Just kind of for a little bit of introduction on Beyond Academia, we're a graduate student and postdoc run and led organization that aims to help grad students and postdocs explore non-academic career options. And so we host panels and other speaker events like this throughout the semester to kind of introduce you to different types of careers that you might want to do after your PhD or after your postdoc. And also one of the major event that we hold every year is an annual conference, which will be held at the end of February on February 25th and 26th this year. That will be all virtual. And that event features about 20 different panels for various career types, as well as about 10 different workshops for different career preparation on career preparation topics. So if you want to get on our email list, you can email info@beyondacademia.berkeley.edu, which I'm putting in the chat right now. And you can also visit our website to learn more. We're always looking for additional volunteers to help on the team. So if you're interested in pursuing non-academic careers and you want to be in an organization with like-minded people, we're the place for you. So then I'll let Haley introduce herself and the Berkeley Science Review, and then we'll get started with our panelists.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I am Haley Mcmahon. I'm the current editor-in-chief of the Berkeley Science Review. And if you aren't familiar with us, we are a graduate student-run publication. We have both a magazine and a blog, and the magazine comes out twice a year. The blog is sort of ongoing. And we have graduate students who are involved with us in different ways. They either write for us, edit for us, or design for us and do graphic design. Our art director, Santi Yori, is also on the call if you're interested in that. And I'll put our website in the chat as well. We will be looking for new magazine writers in just a couple of weeks, and also looking if you're interested in design or editing, we are also looking for new people there. So yeah, I'm excited to hear from all of our panelists today. So why don't we go through and have the four of you introduce yourselves. We have Michael White, who's an editor at Nature. We have Joe Bairzin, who is a science writer at ZS Associates. We have Kevin Doxzen, who is a science writer for IGI. And we have Moon-Yi, who is a postdoc and also a freelance science illustrator. So let's start off with Michael. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Mike White. I've been an editor at Nature since 2008. Kind of arrived there from a career in academia for 7 years, and handle a broad range of climate science. And overall, I'm just been really happy with the move from academia into editing. And I also have a chance to interact with editors at all of our other Nature branded journals too. So a lot of connections with those other journals. Thanks.
Sweet, let's go to Joe.
Hello, I'm Joe Bairzin. I was a grad student in the Hari Haran lab at UC Berkeley and graduated in 2018. And I was also involved with the Berkeley Science Review, was on the design team and former art director. And now I am a senior creative medical writer at ZS Associates, which is kind of a boutique life sciences consulting firm.
Sweet. Let's go to Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I did my PhD in the Doudna lab between 2012 and 2017, and I got my degree in biophysics. And then I transitioned over to the IGI, Innovative Genomics Institute. And my title is Science Communication Specialist. So writing is a small portion of that, but a lot of education, outreach, engagement, communication, all those buzzwords.
Sweet. And Mun?
Hi, I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And for my daily work, I'm an environmental microbiologist, and I work in the rhizosphere as well as in the subsurface anaerobic microbiology. And so, but for my PhD was graduated in 2019. So I've been a year as a postdoc, but I was working at the University of Southern Denmark with electromicrobiology. But now I'm also a freelance illustrator. So I do project-based work with different scientists, and currently I work with a science publisher, like a journal publisher, regularly for journal covers and editorials. And about half a year ago, my friend / colleague and I decided to found a nonprofit organization where we make high quality educational content for STEM students, because we felt like we had the most connections with experts in different STEM fields because we're working in academia, but at the same time, we're both interested in outreach and art. So yeah, thank you.
Perfect. So I can get us started with a couple of questions, and then, but I want the audience to just like be able to answer questions. So you can either, I think putting it in the chat would be easiest, and then either Megan and I will look in the chat and see if there are questions there. So yeah, let's start. My first question for all of you is, how did you get in? How did you decide on going into sort of a science communications career path? And sort of wrapped up in that, like, did you plan for it? Do you have any like relevant experience that sort of set you up for this particular career trajectory? So whoever wants to start, let's go with Kevin, just because I'm looking at you.
Yeah, so I went into grad school with the intention of not doing bench work and not afterward. Well, I was going to do bench work when I was doing my PhD. You have to do it, but after I got it, to not work at the bench. But because I was more interested in talking about science than doing it. But to have that level of credibility, so when you do talk about it, people might listen. But when I was happening to join the Doudna lab, I joined because she was doing RNAi, and who would have thought she, ended up working on CRISPR. So it actually turned into something that had an impact on society, and they were, society was kind of interested in what it could do. And then nepotism happened, and then I got a job. So I will say, like, connections really, really, really matter. And she knew I was interested in communications. And so when the IGI started, she said, hey, come on over and help out.
Awesome. Let's go to Mike.
So I never had a real clear idea of what my career path was going to be when I entered into grad school. And the natural progression seemed to be going into an academic job after I got my PhD. And I more or less, fell into that pretty quickly. And then after several years, came to the conclusion that even though I was moderately good at it and succeeded by the usual metrics of success in academia, I didn't really like it very much. And I liked science, I liked research, but I didn't really like everything else that went along with the job. So I didn't enjoy doing class preparation or grading, writing reports or writing proposals, going to meetings, being at committees, like any of that kind of stuff. That ends up being a really big part of being an academic. And this job at Nature kind of just came along. And I wouldn't say on a whim, but close to on a whim. I applied for it. And then I got the job. I took 2 years of leave from my academic job. And then just in the end, decided that I liked the editing job much, much more on a day-to-day basis and over the long term. So I quit the most secure job in America to become an at-will employee without much advanced planning. And that's how it happened for me.
Sounds risky.
I mean, in practice, Nature editors don't get fired, as far as I know, but nonetheless, it was a big change in job security.
Very different from a tenure track position, for sure. Okay, let's go to Joe.
So yeah, I went into grad school thinking originally that I wanted to go the academia route, and then within 1 year, I realized that I definitely did not want to do that. So I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And I have an art background from before. I was a biology major, and ever since I switched into like becoming a scientist, I've always been trying to like find my way back into that a little bit. So I ended up joining the design team at the Berkeley Science Review so that I could start learning to do graphic design and do something that was a little bit more artistic, but still connected to science. Did that and for long enough that I became the art director, and also wrote a little bit for the blog and did some outreach and stuff. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of like science advocacy, policy related stuff. So going and meeting with legislators and their staff and talking to them about the importance of scientific research. And that kind of all like built up to, okay, I need to find a career in science communications somehow, like either being like a medical writer or doing some other type of science writing or like visual, like data visualization of some sort. And so once I was, close to done with my PhD, I was applying for jobs, and I saw that this medical writing agency called Apothecom was hiring, which is the first place that I started working. And I actually knew someone who's working there from the Berkeley Science Review, who had been the editor-in-chief at the same time that I was art director. So it was really useful having that connection because she graduated from MCB like 1 year before me and had started at Apothecom. And so I was able to contact her and say, hey, I saw this job posting. Do you know anything about it? And then she put me in contact with the person who's in charge of the hiring and stuff. And then that's what led to me getting that job. And then eventually I moved into my current job, which I just started a couple of months ago, so I'm still pretty new at it. Because I was looking for something where I could do medical writing, but still have more of the like creative side of things and not so much the like hard science. Like I was at Apothecom, I was writing a lot of manuscripts like all the time, which like a lot of people like that. So if that's something that you're into, like it's a good job for you, but it wasn't really my jam. So I ended up finding something where I'm still doing a lot of writing, but it's a lot more diverse in terms of the types of projects that I'm working on and the types of writing that I'm doing. So yeah, having connections is super important, but also doing certain activities during grad school is really helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, networking, I've gathered from all these panels I've been on is that networking is super, super important. Okay, yeah, and let's go to Mon. Tell us a little bit about your path.
Yeah, I would have to say networking as well, especially because these are not like, I think it sounds like all of us don't really have a, like there isn't a set path on how to be here. It's just sort of kind of stumbled on in a way. So for me, I've always liked drawing. So drawing is my hobby, and I would do that since young. And then there was one point where I would decide, okay, do I go to art or do I go to science? Because back where I was from, it's not like, it's hard to do both. And and it was easy for me in a way because I like to be in the lab. But so if I go science, I can still draw and be in the lab. But if I choose art, it's kind of harder to be in the lab. And so then I decided to go on more of an academic path. But because I like drawing, and I would share with my colleagues, like, hey, look, I did this, I did that. And then, my friends would also see that. And then they would be like, hey, could you help me design a logo or things like that? So that's how so I would say that I built my experience in just like drawing for clients and others instead of for yourself. And then I would say the first sort of scientific illustration that I did would be together with my supervisor back then, because he wanted to start writing some children's book for microbiology. And he sees my art and he's like, oh, let's self-publish something together. And then we started doing that. And then since then, then I have something to show for scientific illustration. And then then I moved to another lab, and then it was another colleague who saw my art, and then she was like, oh, I have a friend who is starting a new journal. And especially because before you start a new journal, then they can have more choice with what kind of art direction the covers should go towards. Like, because I know some journals are more towards 3D based art and some are more flat, or depending on that. So then I proposed a cover, and that was my first one. And then it's been regularly ever since. And it also expanded because through that connection, they introduced me to more people. They have a certain particular thing that they want because now they know what kind of style I have. And yeah, that's how I would say I got into here. So at this point, I'm not, half of my foot is still in academia, but half is in art, and I'm kind of happy with where I'm at right now.
Are you planning on trying to make science illustration your whole career, or are you planning on staying in academia for the long run?
I don't know yet. I think I like both, and so far it's working out. But I can see if I were to go further ahead into academia, that might get harder, just because it's also a time management issue, right? Because you need to work harder, and I would like to, be good in both. But maybe that's impossible. So at one point, I might have to do a hard choice. But for now, it's okay.
Makes sense. Yeah, and on that note, I'm kind of curious for all of you, what is it? I always wonder this. What does a typical day in the life look like? Is this something that, I always wonder if I would enjoy the sort of day-to-day life of all these different careers. So yeah, let's start with you, Mun. How do you divide the time between art and science?
So I strictly keep my 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 science, and then the nights are for art and also the weekends. So I don't really work in the weekends, but then I work on my own other stuff, which is not really work because it's kind of fun and I can do it at home, and yeah, it's enjoyable. It's a different kind of work.
Awesome. Yeah, let's go in the reverse. Let's go to Joe. What does your life look like day to day?
Yeah, it's a lot of Zoom meetings. I'm sure that's everyone's life right now. But yeah, meetings with the internal teams that I'm working with on whatever project it is to discuss the progress of it and what needs to be done. And then lately I've been working on a lot of PowerPoint decks. So writing the content in those, and then consulting with the visual designers who make the visual parts of that. And some meetings with clients as well, where I have to interface with them and take in their feedback and then implement it and get their ideas and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a lot of sitting at the computer and being on Zoom a lot of the day at the moment. But normally, if COVID wasn't happening, there would be in-person meetings in the office, and we'd go and brainstorm stuff and probably draw things up on a whiteboard and that sort of thing. But yeah, everyone's on the computer all day, every day nowadays.
Yeah. What kind of a clientele do you work with? It's not specifically medical writing. Yeah.
Yeah, so it still is in the life sciences. So our clients are mostly big pharma companies and some other smaller biotech companies. And yeah, but at my first job, it was very, very much straight up medical writing. So I was writing a lot of journal articles, reporting the results of clinical trials and stuff like that, and making training materials for medical science liaisons. So it was definitely in the medical writing realm. And then right now we're doing more not promotional work exactly, but we have my team that I work on. I'm on the creative and design team within my company, because my company is a big 7,000 person firm. And then the creative and design team is a bunch of artists and visual designers and UX people who are there's 40 of us, and we're the crazy kooky creative people. And yeah, we have this framework to do what we call a virtual discovery game, where it's a 3D interface and there are clues that people can click on. It's kind of like an escape room, and we can reskin it to be for one client's particular goals or another client's particular goals, to help them learn how to sell their product better or educate them or do other things like that. So that's a pretty fun type of project.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I see there's a question in the chat, but I'll come back to that one in a second. Yeah, Mike, can you tell us more about your daily life?
Yeah, sure. My son, my 9-year-old son is running around the backyard doing really dangerous things with a 10-foot long piece of bamboo. So I'm slightly distracted. But Haley, actually, I want to ask you, what do you think the job of a Nature editor is like? Because I'm always curious about how people see our job.
Sure. I mean, I've heard from other Nature editors before, but I see it as like you read a lot of papers that come in and sort of decide whether or not they're worth following up on, I guess. And then maybe like writing summaries for other editors or providing feedback on manuscripts, things like that. And also kind of like being a liaison between all the different, people who are involved in writing a paper.
So I think I'm pretty much done now. So all of that is completely correct. Like I would say, like overall, like the big part of a job is reading and evaluation. But I think maybe the part that people don't fully appreciate is how much time we spend on trying to make papers better. So like to improve them through the review process, which could be incredibly time consuming and having 3 or 4 rounds of review. Or you might spend an entire day reading and commenting on and restructuring a review paper. So there's a lot of work that goes into sort of not only kind of managing the review process, but doing what you can as an editor to improve and add value to the process along the way. And then like under normal times, there's also really fun things that you can do, like traveling to meetings that you yourself can choose and getting to interact on the face-to-face basis with the communities that you're serving. So there's a lot of variety to the job, but you're right that the bulk of it is reading papers and making those initial evaluations.
Awesome. Yeah, and then Kevin, can you tell us what you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, so it's changed each year. So I've been at the IGI for 3.5 years, and when I joined, it was kind of like an academic startup. There was only like 5 or 6 staff. There were a few labs that were being funded. And so when I came on, I was managing the website, the social media, help writing press releases, all that stuff. We got to choose which educational tools we wanted to make. So we were making like little phage games, sickle cell virtual reality experiences. We would do community science days, all of that. And then as the Institute's grown, we've hired a science writer who that's all she does, a communications director who manages the media, and then a digital communications person who does the social media now and manages the website. And so that's given me the freedom to do a little more of what I've realized I like to do, which is more expert engagement. So organizing meetings around, should we edit embryos, and like who should join that meeting? What's the output of that? So I really enjoy, I've written some peer-reviewed papers with bioethicists and people in the School of Public Health. So I really enjoy engaging experts and trying to think about those questions.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting that you get to like all the different facets of science communication kind of wrapped up into one. Yeah, so let's go back to some of the questions in the chat. So one that was specifically for Joe, but I'd kind of like to hear from everyone. Is there like a trajectory within your career, a path for advancement? And so, yeah, let's start with Joe. Is there within medical writing or within other types of science writing, is there a clear path there for advancement?
Yeah, there definitely is in traditional medical writing, and also the position that I'm in right now. So most medical writing, I would say, is done like at a medical communications agency, and there usually is like a hierarchy that you kind of move up. So you start out, if you're coming straight out of grad school like I was, you start out at the lowest level, and then you get promoted up and become like a senior medical writer, and then eventually you become like associate medical director or something. There's different like job titles depending on which agency you're at, but yeah, usually there is like a pretty well-defined career path. And when you get past the medical writer like series of jobs, then it's more like a management role. So then you're overseeing the other medical writers and you're doing more of like the strategy side of work. So you're like trying to win new business for your company, or trying to figure out like where the company's going in the future and like what to target and stuff like that. And with my current role, because I was the first medical writer that they hired, basically my team was, it's a a bunch of like designers and then some consultants basically, and they were doing all the writing themselves, but they are obviously like aren't trained scientists, so they don't always know you know, what the proper terminology to use is and stuff like that. And also it's not really their job to do the writing, like their job is to do something else. So they brought me on as the first medical writer, and the idea is that I will, you know, start doing the writing and then they'll start hiring other people after me. And hopefully this will become like its own career track within the creative and design team that I'm on. So yeah, it's a little bit different if you're not in like an agency or a consultancy where there's like, you know, it's a big organization with lots of structure. But yeah, there's definitely room for career growth in a lot of different avenues.
Good to know. Yeah, let's go to Mike on this one next.
So the answer is kind of yes and no. If your main interest is evaluating and working with the science itself, then at a certain point, no. So many people come into the company at one of our other journals like Nature Communications, and then they might make their way up to Nature Genetics and eventually come to Nature. And once you're at Nature, there's sort of nowhere else to go within the company in terms of handling manuscripts. But if you're interested in management, like Joe was saying, in her area, then there's sort of endless opportunities within the company. So a lot of Nature editors then go on to be the chief editor at one of our other journals like Nature Genetics. So they might go to launch a new journal or to become the chief editor at another journal. And then there are a lot of other kind of strategic and management roles that oversee or work with multiple journals or bigger initiatives across our company, which is Springer Nature. So if you're interested more in the management side, running your own journal, or working on more on the publication and finance side of it, then there are a lot of opportunities to go into there. But if your main interest really is staying with the science, then your opportunities can kind of get capped off at Nature, for example.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I don't know if I feel like Kevin and Mon might not have the much of a trajectory in mind, but if you all would like to comment on that, you are welcome to. Seems like both of your positions are kind of ad hoc.
Yeah, I think my colleagues have, and this kind of shows up in one of the questions in the chat, they were hired a lot based on their resume. So our digital communications person had a website with all the videos he's made and whatnot. Our communications director was at Lonely Planet before, so he has a PhD, but you know, he went to do other stuff that was extremely relevant. But what I do now, a lot of the people we work with are science communicators in that they do augmented reality, virtual reality. They run science centers, whatnot. So they had a path, but they aren't specialists in a certain topic. So that's where we come in. If they're interested in doing anything gene editing, they team up with us.
Yeah, so definitely not quite as like a linear trajectory in your field. Yeah, so sort of grouping some of these in the chat together. Yeah, so did any of you have to, especially those of you who are, yeah, I guess this applies to all of you, did you ever have to like put together a portfolio of sort of relevant material for your job, whether that was writing or art or just displaying your editing skills, and sort of how did you prepare for that if that was the case? And then also, yeah, because some of these people are asking if they're more involved in the social science side as well, and not necessarily a hard science PhD, then are there still opportunities for you there? And I imagine your portfolio might play into that a little bit. Anyway, Kevin, could you tell us if you had to, I don't know, ever construct a portfolio?
Me, not so much. I did make my own website a year ago, and that was just for me to write and have fun and practice writing. I was kind of sick of writing press releases, and I like long form Ed Yong, like what, you know, so it was really just for fun. but like I was saying with my colleagues who I've been a lot on the hiring end recently in the past 2 years. And when we look at hiring a certain person, it's less about what do they know rather than how well do they do it. And they all did have portfolios, either of stuff they've done on the side or previous jobs. So someone, yeah, you could be a psychology student and not write on psychology.
Yeah, and do you have any like advice on sort of building that type of portfolio or putting it together? Is it just best to like go out and like start a blog, or is it better to like go write for a specific science outlet or something?
Yeah, I've never had much luck pitching to places. I don't know if other people on the panel can speak to that, but it is good to see when someone has written something and pitched it and it got published someplace. But writing for your own blog is always nice, but it's not necessary.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Joe. Did you have a portfolio of any kind?
Yeah, so I had like a design portfolio / art portfolio and like a writing portfolio that I used. Although the writing portfolio was much less formal because it was really dependent on like what a certain job was asking for when I was applying. With my current job, they asked me for, I think, like 3 different writing samples. So I also like started my own website and a blog like when I think I was still in grad school, or it was like right afterwards. No, I was definitely still in grad school. And I also used it just to practice writing and writing about science, but also just about like politics and other stuff like that. So I pulled some of my writing from my blog and submitted that. And I think I also, with my particular job that I have now, they were like, can you show us examples of like academic writing that you've contributed to at your current position? So at my first job out of grad school, I pulled some of the published papers that I had worked on, that I had like written the first draft of and then edited and taken in the client comments and stuff like that.
Got it. Mung, do you have any, are you working on building a portfolio, or have you had to use one?
I would, I had not really formally used my art portfolio, but I do have one, just because when you do some drawings and you want it to be somewhere, one place, and when you want to show people, that's just a lot easier. And that just sort of ended up, in retrospect, being my portfolio, because I didn't make it for the purpose of I'm going to apply for a job or anything like that. But I would say it's nice to have one, so you can just anytime pop it out. Like if I go to a conference and like I hear someone's making writing a textbook, for example, and then I'm like, hey, do you want to cover? And then you can say, oh, this is what I do, and they'll be like, oh, cool, interested, blah blah blah. So it's always a good idea to have one, and it doesn't take too long to make it because you've already done it, I guess. So in that sense, yes, try to have one.
Right. Yeah, and then Mike, I don't know if there's such thing as like an editing portfolio.
No, not really. I mean, it's pretty much your CV is your initial portfolio, I would say. But on the social science part of the questions, I'll take a crack at that because yeah, we've launched several journals that have a strong social science remit or explicitly on that. And within Nature, we just hired an economist for the first time ever in the history of the journal. And Nature Communications is hiring at least one sociologist right now, and has actually had a bit of a hard time, I think, recruiting. So I think the kind of the job market for sociologists who would like to work within a physical science company like ours is actually fairly good right now. You would have probably better odds of landing a position coming from social sciences than you would from physical or biological sciences.
That's interesting that it's kind of moving in that direction. Yeah, so there are a couple more specific questions, I guess. This one I would direct to Joe. Does psychology and mental health writing fall within the realm of science or medical writing? I don't know what kind of medical writing you all did at Apopicom.
Yeah, there was certainly like some neuroscience medical writing that went on. I feel like they're really just looking for, if you have a PhD and you can understand the science, even if it's not your realm of expertise, like you have the training to read a paper and try and figure out what exactly they're talking about and what all their measures are. So you could probably apply for some medical writing jobs. I feel like the other PhDs that I know for medical writing are mostly like in the biological sciences, but they do also hire like PharmDs a lot of the time. So that's also like a little bit different. So yeah, you could try and like, you know, if you can make the case that you're a good writer and that you can understand the data and translate that in the way that they want to, then you probably would have a shot at getting a job.
Perfect. Okay, a question for those of you who are involved with educational material. How do you get funding for educational content? Like who's going to pay for the creation of those materials, especially when you're competing against content companies that have, you know, a lot of ad revenue and things like that. So yeah, Kevin might be a good one. I don't know.
So I mean, we're living in a time where a YouTuber is an actual occupation, so it's tough to compete with that. But what comes to mind is iBiology. Some of you might know them, but they make fantastic videos, and they're funded by like foundations. So if you're not generating revenue, then you have to get your money from something like a foundation, or we're philanthropically funded mostly. So we make all our videos based on, you know, just philanthropists. We fund like Science at Cal to make videos, but Science at Cal, you know, is a nonprofit. So it's tough competition, definitely, to compete against YouTubers, but it's a totally different market too. So if you're trying to make something for high school teachers to use in their classrooms, one of my colleagues is interested in making a MOOC. So you can make these videos to teach, but in the end, that's a different way because they're paying to maybe get a degree via this massive online open course. So yeah.
Gotcha. And Mon, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I don't think I have very good things to add to what Kevin has just said, because we've also just sort of started to get into this kind of field, and we're going with so far we're nonprofit, so we're relying on donations, and we'll start applying for grants and philanthropic funding for now. And I think one of the reasons why we can do this so far is also because we have our own day jobs, and I think, you know, if we don't have that, that would be a lot harder. So then it's a matter of sort of like a sacrifice of your time, I would say. But you know, we think it's worth it, and we're interested in it. So far, all of our effort and everything is just for free. And then we're also releasing open access videos, and also on YouTube. So we're also competing against all these other YouTubers, and and we don't really have like, you know, metrics of like what is the return that we want to get out of these. But for our main goals right now is we want to be contact with like high school teachers and see what kind of information that they need, and so that, you know, we can try to go to the scientists themselves and try to come up with material that will help them. So, and as long as we can do that, and we're happy, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds like, yeah, donations for for educational content are super important. That's what the BSR relies on too. So okay, another question, sort of shifting back to something that Mike said. Why do you think it's the case that social science grads are being recruited by physical science journals more often now?
It goes back to about maybe 10 years ago when our previous editor-in-chief, Philip Campbell, basically made the decision that we were not paying enough attention to the social science part of many topics. So like in my area, you can think about climate change, and already at that time we had a pretty good idea about what was going on with climate change, what was causing it, but we were publishing much less on the human system components about what we're controlling overall societal and personal decisions about, you know, what to do about climate change. And unless you actually engage with those communities, it could be economics, you know, human behavior, whatever it might be, politics, you know, you're not going to make much headway on the topic, specifically, you know, in the pages of Nature. So Phil began to, you know, encourage the individual editors to make outreach in these areas. And the way it works is that, like for me, I began to do a lot of climate economics. I kind of took that on for about 3 or 4 years. And a lot of it was interaction with people actually at Cal. And then after a while, you hopefully build enough momentum in that topic where you get enough submissions to justify hiring a specific editor in that topic. And that happened across multiple topics within sociology, across multiple journals kind of simultaneously, and resulted in a lot of increase and growth sort of within journals, and also the launch of new journals as well. But at the same time, like those communities aren't necessarily looking at Nature as a venue, either for applying for jobs or for submissions. So it's sort of, for a while, it's a bit of a catch-22. It's sort of hard to hire people because they're not looking for jobs in those journals. So a lot of it is just doing like this kind of outreach too.
Sweet, thank you. Okay, now question for any of you. Outside of networking, where do you recommend that people look for job listings in each of your respective fields? Yeah, which is also something I've wondered about. So Mike, you can start us off.
Well, I mean, I know it's kind of trite to say it, but our LinkedIn page is a place to look for jobs within that area. I guess it would cover all of our news and comment editor positions as well. And I found my job in the pages of a trade magazine, EOS Transactions, and then within my area, within climate in particular, including in science communication, I see a lot of jobs that I would otherwise be unaware of just on social media, on Twitter, which is, again, like no great surprise to anybody here, but there is a lot of job activity on Twitter.
How do you go about finding jobs on Twitter? I'm terrible at using social media.
I mean, like, honestly, people will just put on things like tag it like, you know, SciComm job or hashtag SciComm job, or if you just follow the SciComm hashtag on Twitter, a lot of them come out through that. That's kind of how I would tend to come across them, through those sort of hashtags.
Interesting. Okay, Kevin, any?
Yeah, so, well, yeah, Twitter's excellent. Follow influencers, a lot of things trickle down from them. But what I ran into is, you know, if you search science communication on LinkedIn, every job description has the word science and communication in it. And that's not, you know, the algorithm isn't going to do anything for you. So instead, one thing I kind of recommend is do more research in what conferences are out there. So find some that are really interesting to you. Now, obviously, you can't go to all of these because they cost money and they're not local, but you can look at who's speaking at them. And that's been a way where I find out about all these people who have awesome jobs I've never heard of. And then I've cold emailed a lot of them. And I've had like a 50% success rate about setting up a call or a video chat. So that's been a really nice mechanism.
That's interesting. I never thought about using conferences as a in that way. Joe, do you have any advice on job searching?
Yeah, I also echo that LinkedIn is a good place to look. That's where I found my current job. And actually, that's where I found the Apothecom job listing too. Yeah, I tended to just go for like the more traditional route of looking for jobs on LinkedIn, or I looked at Indeed a little bit. I was also applying for like government science communications jobs. So that would be like the usajobs.gov website. And like, that's a whole, like applying for government jobs is kind of a whole different thing of like, you need to provide all kinds of information, and there's a structure to it, and it's really hard to get your foot in the door. There's also, Twitter's good for that too, for, posting job listings. Sorry, my bird is making a lot of noise in the background. And especially for like fellowships and stuff in science policy, which if you wanted to do that, because it is also a little bit like science writing and science communication, lots of fellowships get posted that way, and it's a good way to network as well.
As a quick follow-up to that, Joe, what are some examples of government science communication jobs? Does that refer to working for federal agencies?
So like there are jobs doing like being like, I'm trying to remember what some of the titles were. I applied to a bunch because with COVID, the CDC put all these job listings out for like communications related things or like public health advisor type jobs and stuff like that. And basically, I assumed, I didn't hear anything back from them. So obviously, like they either found someone or they didn't hire anyone. But I assumed it was because they needed to educate people on COVID and they needed people to come in and like make the materials that they were using to, inform people of research or of the ways to not spread the virus and stuff like that. I figured that's what it was.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Mon, do you have any advice on finding job postings?
I would second Twitter, especially if you're looking for project-based kind of work. Like a lot of the scientists don't know if they do have like a illustration project, right? They don't know where to find the artists. So then it's really easy for them to just put it out on Twitter, like with a hashtag. And then also for the artists, like because there's no, well, there are studios where they sort of specialized in different scientific illustrations and stuff, but then they're it might be a bit more intimidating than just contacting someone directly. But I would say traditionally, I think illustrators would also be associated with different publishers. So once you get sort of hired by a publisher on like a contractual basis, then you have more regular jobs, regular illustrations to do. So for this, I have not tried it myself because the one I got in was through contacts. But I imagine one day I would, once I feel like I have some more time and I have built up more of an impressive CV, I would contact different publishers and say, hey, would you like to get me on as an illustrator? And yeah, if it works out, I will let you all know.
Yeah. Okay, and also related to this, Sierra asks, how essential was social media for finding opportunities and developing networks? If you're someone who doesn't use social media, is that like a major problem? And Sierra, I don't know if you also don't use LinkedIn, but yeah, I don't know if you want to, Sierra, do you want to unmute and comment on that?
Yeah, I actually do have a LinkedIn, although again, I do not currently really use it. It just exists.
Okay, so yeah, is it necessary to have social media, or is in-person networking possible? I guess would be the question. Anyone can feel free to jump in on this one.
I can answer that. Yeah, I feel like you kind of need something. Definitely having a LinkedIn so that people can keep in touch with you and find you easily. And also so that like if you were to post on it, then it kind of brings you up to top of mind for people who are looking at it and looking at their feeds. And I would say that like having other social media like Twitter might also help doing that. So if you're trying to like get into science writing of some sort and you are writing a blog, it's good for promoting your work to like post it on Twitter and then have people react to it, and it gives you some visibility. So as much as social media sucks in a lot of ways, like it is like pretty key. I don't know how you would keep up a network without some kind of social media, and like LinkedIn included.
So there's some interesting studies on this. I gave a talk to people interested in using Twitter to combat misinformation. And a lot of scientists, there's an echo chamber, and it actually takes a decent number of followers to go over this tipping point to where I actually start reaching the public, which isn't a problem if you're talking about networking, because you only, but if you're interested in having real dialogue and visually seeing what else is out there, you actually need sustained engagement on Twitter, which takes time and energy and posting. But if you just want to like see what other people are doing, then you can just follow thousands of people. But there is utility in actually having people follow you.
Definitely. Okay. I'm also curious, kind of like what, aside from your scientific backgrounds, what kind of skills that you got either in your PhD or thereafter do you use in your current position? So I guess some of the like softer skills. Kevin, do you want to comment on that first?
Yeah, so let's see. I engage with a lot of high school teachers and parents with young kids, and they're always like, how can I get little Johnny to be the next NASA astronaut? And there's also studies on this where it's, there's going to be a surplus of a lot of PhDs and experts and people interested in STEM, really pushing STEM hard. So it's actually really, really useful to have social skills and being able to write, definitely being able to write. So one thing I would recommend is being able to speak as well. There's a totally different way to speak. That's not like speaking to a scientific audience like you would at a conference, like a totally different type of speaking. And so I would highly recommend doing those, giving talks in bars or in libraries. And it's a lot of fun and it takes practice. But those are the skills that I think set you apart.
Okay. Yeah, Mike, do you have any thoughts on non-science skills that are helpful?
It's kind of similar to what Kevin was saying, but a really important skill to develop for being an editor is not being defensive. So you're going to get criticized by authors, you're going to get criticized by readers on Twitter and other places. And the natural instinct is just sort of to fight and to defend. And to a large degree, especially on Twitter, you're never ever going to win that battle. And with authors, you have to have a lot of empathy for what they're going through and the way that they're going to be feeling, probably from the decision that you just sent them. And just learning to not react or to have a delayed reaction and to give it time and to sort of not to give in to your initial emotions. I think it's a very hard skill to learn, but at least in this career that I'm in, it's an important skill to have.
That's interesting. I never thought about that. Joe, what other skills do you use?
Definitely negotiation, like when you're in the process of finding a job, because you can almost always negotiate, especially if it's for a private company. It's a good way to set your base salary at higher than what they want to initially offer you, which will then set you up to make more at every other job that you have basically down the line. Yeah, I echo what Kevin said about writing. Having writing skills, like I think broadly, is really important, and not that many people are really good at writing. So, and obviously for science communication, that's something that's really important. Being very well practiced at distilling down really complex topics into something that people can understand and making it kind of bite-sized. That's really important for science communication for a broader audience. And also just, yeah, like putting yourself in the mindset of your audience. So similar to what Michael was saying, like, especially if you're trying to go into policy or something like that, and you have an audience where like, maybe they're a little bit skeptical of the thing that you're trying to explain to them. Think about like where they're coming from and how you can frame your message so that it will resonate with them.
And Mon, do you have other skills?
Yeah, I agree with what Joe has said, because you have to like especially at least for when I'm illustrating something, I have to think that this is for the audience. So you sort of have to know how to sell it, because ultimately, you want to design something that you like, but also the client likes, and you have to know what your client is. So for example, if I'm drawing for a journal editor, for example, because I also do some illustration side that's not scientific, right? So if I'm doing something scientific, I would go a bit more of the nerdy route, like add a little more details where you would get it if you are a scientist in this field. And people like that a lot. And so you kind of have to know about your client and things like that. You won't get it in a normal traditional PhD practice. So yeah, so like trying to read people, like social skills are definitely important, I would say. Yeah, in addition to everything what people have said so far.
Yeah, definitely being able to relate to people. Megan, is it okay if I do these last few questions in the chat before we go to break rooms? Or
Yeah, I'd say if we'll wrap up the questions that are currently in the chat, and then if anyone has any other ones, you can pop into the breakout room for the respective person you'd like to ask it to. So
perfect. Okay, so as question from Celia, as graduate students, did your advisor support you in pursuing science communication careers, or did you find that support and mentorship from someone else? Yeah, let's start with Mun. You can go ahead and jump back in.
Yes and no. So she wasn't like oh, you can't do that, you have to focus on science. She was supportive, but it was actually my colleague who sort of got me on connected with people from different journal publishers and stuff like that. So I owe a lot of gratitude towards her, because that was that tipping point where you are sort of now known to people in the science publication field. Before that, I was just drawing mostly for my own and other kinds of non-scientific stuff. So I owe a lot to her. So if you have like a specific interest in something, it's always nice to let people know, because you never know who might help you a lot.
Definitely. Joe, did you have any, was your advisor supportive of you?
Yeah, he was definitely supportive. He didn't always know like how best to support me. So it wasn't like he had a ton of connections in science writing or science communication or policy to, put me in touch with, but he was supportive of me going and seeking those things out on my own. So like when I did like all the BSR stuff, or when I did a lot of the science policy stuff, and I went to Washington, D.C. a couple of times to do advocacy, he was like 100% behind me and like very enthusiastic about that. But I think it's because a lot of professors, especially the older professors, are used to training people and then like seeing them go onto academia. And I think that's changing a little bit. And the more people that start doing these other like non-academic careers, the more connections they will have with like their former trainees and other people that they know, in order to connect their current grad students and postdocs with people with those skills. So I think it's changing a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with that. Kevin, it seems like Jennifer kind of helped you. But
yeah, my last year she used some grant money to pay for me to go to AAAS conference and network and see what jobs are out there. So that was a benefit of telling her what my interests were. But I'm sure it depends on if your PI is a new PI or if they're established. So I guess talking with lab alumni is important. But I do know people who a chapter of their PhD is on not science, it's on a social science, it's on DEI, it's on a whole bunch of stuff. So there could be a lot of benefit in being transparent with your PI.
For sure. And Mike, you're going to have a very different perspective on this, transitioning at a much later point in your career.
Yeah, no, my advisor wasn't involved at all in my transition to editing, but not because he was unsupportive. I just never asked him to do that. It was at a phase in our relationship where I didn't feel like I wasn't working with him on a day-to-day basis. It had been like 7 years since we published together. So it just didn't seem like the right thing to be asking him to do.
Did you sort of, I don't know, reach out to anyone else who was sort of your mentor in transitioning into this position, or were you just like,
no, not at all. I applied for the job in 15 minutes. That's how I spent very little time applying for it. Like I say, it was almost a whim. So it didn't require any like forethought or mentoring. I essentially lucked into it at the right time in my life without a lot of need for like mentoring or advanced planning, honestly.
That's wild. Okay. And then the last question that we have in the chat right now, how important are data or statistical analysis skills in science and editor positions, or science communication and editor positions? And if so, what steps did you take to develop these types of skills? So aside from your sort of like science knowledge, what kind of analytical skills do you need to do your job? Mike, you can go ahead and talk on that.
So it's totally bizarre, but really it's not that important. So the question that we're asking ourselves as editors, at least in Nature, right, it varies across journals, is if all of this was true, would we want to publish the paper? And that's the main question. The main question for us isn't, as an editor, is the work correct? That's why we go to reviewers. That said, it is really important to know when you have to go to a specialist reviewer for data and statistical analysis. So if you're totally unaware of what's going on with data and stats, then you won't even know the right questions to ask. You won't even understand that there's a need to have a particular method evaluated because it's controversial, or because it's new, or because it's sensitive to how the parameterizations are done. So it actually still is really important to have a basic conceptual grasp of the methods that are being used. So even though you don't need to know the details of it, you have to be able to evaluate it on a conceptual level.
And were those skills that you developed sort of like in your career that were able to translate, or do you have to like sort of stay on top of the new methods that are in that field?
Yeah, I mean, it's a rolling goalpost. So you kind of come in knowing what the current methods are when you did your research. And I knew what those were, particularly in like ecological modeling and remote sensing and things like that. But I was largely unfamiliar with the concerns that would exist with using like atmospheric reanalyses, for example. So a lot of it you have to kind of pick up on the fly and be able to kind of get the overall gestalt of what's going on with a particular method. And the one that's at the forefront now, like no surprise, is machine learning, and trying to stay up to a certain degree on the different methodologies that are involved. And one way you do that, honestly, is like you commission a review on the topic. So that's what I did. When you commission a review, you get to read all these reviews that are coming in about the topic, and then the review paper itself ends up being this great primer on the topic itself. So you can kind of suit the job to, in some ways, self-educate you. And then I also ran a podcast for like 3 years and did a bunch of interviews there. And it was a bit self-serving too, because then I get to ask all these questions about the methods that I'm having to evaluate as an editor through a podcast.
That's interesting. Outsourcing your education. Kevin, can you talk about how much you rely on?
I don't know the last time I used a number, so that's I can't speak to that.
Perfect. How about you, Joe? Any stats in your field?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like you just need to be able to learn on the fly if there's something that you don't understand. Obviously, like getting a PhD will probably train you in some of the basic statistical methods so that you can at least understand if they're used like in a paper that you're reading. But yeah, definitely when I started as a medical writer, there were statistical measures that they were like using to tell if something was significant in a lot of the papers that I read that I hadn't come across before, and I just had to learn on the job. So, but I think getting a PhD trains you really well to do that, because like that's a lot of what you do is like independently going and learning these different methods, or picking up a topic that's really dense and just figuring it out. So yeah, it's important, but you can learn.
Yeah, definitely. And Mon, your academic job, I'm sure, involves this, but do you have any tips on learning new stats?
For my job, you just have to read. But for illustrating, I don't think having statistical analysis is important. But like Joe said, if you have a training in your PhD training should sort of prep you so that you can read any kind of science paper and understand what's going on, that you can then translate into a visually compelling piece. And then, yeah, so for that, you don't really need statistical analysis understanding, but just understanding a paper in general, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, if there aren't any more questions in the chat, then I guess we can work on the breakout rooms, Megan.
Yeah, I guess the last thing would be is if any of the panelists have any like tips or things that they'd like to share with like the overall audience before we transition into individual like breakout networking rooms. Now would be the time to do that. I don't know if any of you have anything.
So the other thing I would say is, like, if you're thinking about a career in editing, our company as a whole is constantly hiring for temporary editors, which we call locum editors. So if you're at like the postdoc stage, coming in as a locum editor is a great thing to do because your knowledge base will just completely explode within this 1 year job typically. And if you want to stay in editing and you're a good match with the job, it's very likely you'll be able to find another editing job within the company. But if you come back to the bench from that opportunity, like your ability to think broadly is going to be just vastly increased. So it's a great thing to do at the postdoc stage.
I would just say it's also SciComm's a growing field. Just in the last 4 years, I've just seen it. So I would be optimistic. If you're having trouble finding something, it's only continuing to grow. People are realizing that it needs to be invested in.
I would just say, like, do as many extracurricular activities in grad school as you can. Certainly the BSR was probably the single biggest thing that helped me to get into my field. Just having that experience, like doing the writing and doing the translation of the science. And then also like all the policy work that I did too. You definitely have time to do it, even though it feels like you never have any time in grad school and you're always in lab. Like, I would think of it as part of your PhD training, like going out and getting those other skills, starting a blog and just writing, even if not many people read it. You definitely have time to do it, and it should just be like thought of as a necessary part of getting the degree.
Yeah, and I just want to add that, similarly along the same lines, just like be open to any kind of opportunities. So even if you like illustrating, and if it's not necessarily scientific illustrating, sort of like a gig that you get, like try it, because you still learn how to draw for someone else. And if it's a writing opportunity, you still learn how to write something else that maybe you might not be super interested in, but you still learn to write an interesting piece about it. And that's a skill that you can develop on.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all 4 panelists for being here tonight. This has been really awesome. There's been all sorts of information that I don't think I would have like heard from anywhere else. And thank you to Haley for moderating. Did an excellent job. So we're going to transition to a networking phase.